Han-Jun was not asleep. His eyes were closed, his breathing deep and controlled, his tattooed frame reclined into the black leather of his throne-like chair. To anyone entering the room, he looked like a dangerous man caught in a rare moment of rest. But beneath those eyelids, Han-Jun was fully alert, watching, testing, and hunting for proof. At 42, Han-Jun commanded one of the most feared criminal organizations in the city. He controlled territories, underground casinos, and protection rackets that stretched across 3 districts. He had everything a man of power could demand, except faith in humanity. Violence had shaped him. Betrayal had taught him. His own blood relatives had tried to poison him for his empire. His most trusted lieutenants had sold him out to rivals. Even household staff had attempted to rob him. Jewelry, cash, confidential documents. Han-Jun believed every person had a price. Put temptation within reach and remove the consequences, and anyone would reveal their true nature. Today, in the suffocating silence of his private study, with $20,000 sitting openly in a briefcase on his desk, he was going to prove that theory once more. Before we go any further, if stories like this move you the way they move me, make sure you subscribe. It helps these stories continue, and it tells me you want more. Imani Davis had cleaned the homes of dangerous men before, but none like Han-Jun. The other women who worked the mansion's lower floors whispered about him in the kitchen. How his silence was more terrifying than his rage. How men had disappeared for looking at him wrong. How the ink crawling up his neck wasn't decorative, but a ledger of debts paid in blood. Imani didn't listen to gossip. She couldn't afford to. This job was her lifeline, the only thing standing between her son and the roach-infested studio apartment in the slums where mold grew faster than hope. But today, her childcare had fallen through. Again. Louis's grandmother was sick, and the neighbor who usually watched him had stopped answering her calls after Imani couldn't pay her last week. She'd had no choice but to bring her 7-year-old son to work, hiding him in the service hallway with stern instructions to stay quiet and invisible. That had worked until the head housekeeper assigned her to clean Han-Jun's private study. The one room in the entire estate where mistakes weren't tolerated. Where staff entered alone and left grateful to still be breathing. Imani's hands trembled as she pushed open the heavy door, Louis tucked behind her like a shadow. The study smelled of leather and something darker. Expensive cologne mixed with old smoke and older violence. Her eyes immediately found Han-Jun in his chair, apparently asleep, and her heart nearly stopped. She'd been told he was in a meeting across town. The open briefcase on his desk, stuffed with more cash than she'd earned in 3 years, seemed to pulse like a beating heart. She knelt beside Louis, gripping his small shoulders. "Baby, listen to me," she whispered, her voice urgent and shaking. "That man is the boss. You don't touch anything. You don't make a sound. You don't even breathe loud, you understand? If he wakes up and sees you here..." She couldn't finish the sentence. The possibilities were too terrible. "Just sit in that corner and don't move. Mama will be fast." Louis nodded, his dark eyes wide and solemn. He was wearing the oversized yellow cleaning gloves he'd found in the supply closet, several sizes too large for his small hands. He'd insisted on wearing them, wanting to help his mother work. Now they looked absurdly innocent against the room's oppressive darkness. Imani worked with frantic efficiency, dusting shelves without really seeing them, her attention split between the sleeping boss and her son. Every creak of the floorboards felt like an alarm. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 10 minutes, she finished. She grabbed her supplies and mouthed to Louis to follow her. But as she reached the door, her supervisor's voice crackled through her radio. "Emergency in the West Wing. Water leak." She was needed immediately. Imani looked back at her son, then at the still-sleeping Han-Jun, then at the door. The choice was impossible. If she didn't respond, she'd be fired. If she left Louis here. "Stay exactly where you are," she mouthed to Louis, pointing firmly at the corner. "Don't move." Then she slipped out, the door clicking shut behind her with the finality of a trap closing. Louis sat perfectly still in the corner for approximately 30 seconds. Then he noticed something. The sleeping man's hand, draped over the armrest, looked uncomfortable. His neck was bent at an odd angle. His breathing seemed heavy. Labored. What if he was sick? Louis had seen his grandmother struggle to breathe like that. What if the boss needed help? The child stood slowly, the yellow gloves squeaking softly. He took one careful step forward. Then another. The briefcase full of money might as well have been invisible. Louis's entire focus was on the man who looked like he might be in pain, who might need someone to check on him. He moved closer, his small hand reaching out, preparing to gently touch the man's arm. Just to make sure he was okay. If you're still here, thank you, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the rest of stories like this. Behind his closed eyelids, Han-Jun tracked every sound. The soft squeak of rubber on hardwood. The whisper of small feet approaching. The child was moving toward him, just as he'd predicted. They always did. Greed was universal, transcending age, race, and circumstance. Even a 7-year-old would reach for easy money when no one was watching. He'd seen it before. A delivery boy pocketing bills from his desk. A gardener's teenage daughter slipping jewelry into her sleeve. This would be no different. The mother had probably sent the child deliberately, using his innocence as cover, knowing people would be more forgiving if a child was caught stealing rather than an adult. It was almost clever. Han-Jun waited for the telltale rustle of paper, the sliding sound of cash being lifted from the briefcase. He would let the boy take a few bills. Let him think he'd gotten away with it. Then, when the mother returned, he would destroy them both with the evidence of their greed. Not physically, he wasn't a monster, despite what people thought. But he would fire the woman publicly, blacklist her from every decent job in the city, make sure everyone knew what her precious son had done. The footsteps stopped. Close. Very close. But there was no sound from the briefcase. Instead, Han-Jun felt something unexpected. A small hand, swallowed by oversized rubber, touched his own hand where it rested on the chair's arm. The contact was feather-light, tentative, warm through the strange barrier of the yellow glove. What the hell was this? The child's hand patted his gently, as if checking for something. Then withdrew. A beat of silence. Then the boy's voice, barely above a whisper, soft with worry. "Sir? Are you okay?" Han-Jun's thoughts stuttered. This wasn't the script. Children didn't ask if he was okay. Adults didn't ask if he was okay. People feared him, obeyed him, sometimes tried to kill him, but no one had shown concern for his well-being in. He couldn't remember how long. The small hand returned, this time touching his shoulder, gently adjusting the collar of his jacket that had folded awkwardly against his neck. The gesture was clumsy, unpracticed, the way a child might fix a blanket on someone sleeping. The yellow gloves made soft squeaking sounds with each careful movement. "You're breathing funny," Lewis whispered, more to himself than to Han-Jun. "Like Grandma when she got real sick." Another pause. Then the child did something that cracked through Han-Jun's carefully constructed test like a sledgehammer through ice. Lewis took off one of the oversized yellow gloves and pressed his small, warm palm against Han-Jun's forehead, checking for fever. The way a child who'd watched adults care for sick people might do. The way someone who actually cared would do. "You're cold," Lewis said, sounding worried. "Should I get help? Should I tell someone?" The briefcase sat untouched on the desk. $20,000 in clear view, easily accessible. The child had walked right past it. Had ignored it completely. Not once had his attention shifted to the money. Not once had he glanced at it with calculation or desire. This wasn't possible. Han-Jun had run this test dozens of times over the years. Different people, different amounts, different scenarios. Everyone took the money. Everyone. A starving man would steal to eat. That was expected. A comfortable person would steal out of opportunity. That was human nature. A child would steal out of ignorance of consequences. But this child hadn't taken anything. He'd given something instead. Concern. Care. A clumsy, innocent gesture of compassion for a man who'd spent decades ensuring no one would dare show him such vulnerability. Lewis's hand remained on Han-Jun's forehead for another moment, then carefully adjusted his jacket collar again, trying to make him more comfortable. The yellow glove squeaked softly as he put it back on. "I'll stay quiet," the boy whispered. "Mama said not to wake you. But if you need something, I can go get her. I'm not supposed to leave, but if you're really sick..." For the first time in 20 years, Han-Jun didn't know what to do. His entire worldview was collapsing around a 7-year-old boy in yellow cleaning gloves who was worried about a stranger's fever. Take a breath, and if you haven't already, subscribe. It helps keep these stories alive. The door burst open with enough force to make the hinges protest. Imani stood in the doorway, her chest heaving from sprinting up 3 flights of stairs, her eyes wild with the kind of terror that only a parent knows. The absolute certainty that your child is in mortal danger, and it's your fault. She saw it all in an instant. Lewis standing beside the chair, his small hand resting on the boss's shoulder. The yellow glove bright and obscene against the black leather and expensive fabric. And worst of all, the briefcase on the desk, open, money visible, untouched but right there. Right where her son could have taken it. Right where the boss would think he had taken it. "Lewis!" The word came out as a strangled whisper scream. She crossed the room in 3 strides and grabbed her son by the arm, yanking him backward with enough force that he stumbled. The yellow gloves fell from his hands and hit the floor with a soft thud. Lewis made a small sound of confusion and pain, but Imani barely heard it over the roaring in her ears. "I'm so sorry, sir. I'm so sorry, he didn't mean." The words tumbled out in a frantic stream as she pulled Lewis behind her, positioning her body between her child and the man in the chair. Her hands were shaking so badly, she could barely keep her grip on Lewis's arm. "Please, he's just a baby. He doesn't understand. He didn't touch anything. I swear he didn't touch anything." But he had touched something. She'd seen it. He'd touched the boss himself. Men had died for less. "Mama, he was sick. I was just..." Lewis tried to explain, his voice small and frightened now, finally understanding from his mother's terror that he'd done something terrible. "Quiet," Imani hissed, tears burning in her eyes. She turned back to the sleeping figure, her voice breaking. "Sir, please, I take full responsibility. He's 7. He doesn't know anything. Whatever he did, whatever you think happened, it was my fault for bringing him here. Please." She was begging. She knew she was begging. She'd sworn she'd never beg anyone for anything after Lewis's father left, but this was different. This was her son's life. "Fire me. Blacklist me. Do whatever you want of me, but please, he's just a child. Please don't hurt him." The room was silent except for her ragged breathing and Lewis's quiet sniffling behind her. Then Han Jun's eyes opened. The transition was immediate and absolute. One moment he looked like a sleeping man, the next his gaze was sharp, cold, and fully aware. Those dark eyes fixed on Imani first, then dropped to Lewis cowering behind her, then traveled slowly to the fallen yellow gloves on the floor, then finally to the briefcase of money on his desk. His expression gave away nothing. No anger, no surprise, no mercy. He sat up slowly, deliberately, straightening his jacket with the same mechanical precision Lewis had tried to adjust moments before. The silence stretched like a blade being drawn. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, controlled, and more frightening than any shout could have been. "Your son touched me." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. An accusation. A judgment. Imani felt her knees go weak. Lewis pressed closer against her back, his small hands clutching her uniform. "Yes, sir," she whispered, because lying would make it worse. "He did. I'm so sorry. He didn't mean any disrespect. He's never been around someone like you. He doesn't understand the rules." Han Jun's gaze shifted back to the briefcase, then to Lewis, then back to Imani. His face remained stone. "No one," he said softly, each word measured and deliberate, "touches me without permission." The air in the room felt thin, suffocating. "I understand, sir," Imani said, her voice barely audible. What would you have me do?" Han Jun stood. The movement was fluid, controlled, powerful. He was taller than Imani remembered, his presence filling the room like smoke. He looked down at the mother shielding her child, at the boy in his simple clothes and white tank top, at the abandoned yellow gloves on his floor. And his expression remained utterly unreadable. "If this chapter touched something in you, tap subscribe. There's so much more ahead." Han Jun walked past them, his movements deliberate and measured. He didn't glance at the briefcase. Didn't mention the money at all. Instead, he moved to the far wall where a glass display case held his most prized possessions. Artifacts from his family's history, objects that carried weight beyond their material value. He stopped in front of a mounted katana, its blade catching the dim light. The sword had belonged to his grandfather, a relic from the old country, passed down through 3 generations. Han Jun stared at it for a long moment, then reached out and traced his finger along the glass just above the blade's edge. "This sword," he said quietly, his back still to Imani and Lewis, "has been in my family for 70 years. It survived a war. It survived my father's enemies. It has never been damaged." He turned slowly, his expression carved from ice. His finger pointed to a spot on the display case's wooden frame. A tiny scratch in the lacquer, barely visible, probably months old. Until today. Imani's eyes widened. She stepped closer, squinting at the mark. It was minuscule, the kind of wear that happened naturally over time. It couldn't have been. "My son never went near that case," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "Sir, he was only by your chair. He never. Are you calling me a liar?" Han Jun's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than a shout. Imani's protest died in her throat. She looked at Lewis, who was staring at the case with wide, confused eyes, clearly trying to remember if he'd touched it. He shook his head slightly. He hadn't. But that didn't matter. "The repair," Han Jun continued, walking back toward them with the measured pace of a predator, "will require a master craftsman. The wood must be stripped, refinished, matched perfectly to preserve the integrity of the piece. This is not ordinary furniture. This is history." He stopped directly in front of Imani, towering over her. $5,000. The number hit Imani like a physical blow. $5,000. She made $300 a week. After rent, food, utilities, her son's school supplies, she saved maybe $40 a month if they were lucky. If nothing broke. If no one got sick. $5,000 was over 3 years of savings. Han Jun watched her face carefully, cataloging every micro-expression. This was the moment. This was when people revealed themselves. She would turn on the child, blame him, yell at him, shake him, demand to know why he'd ruined her life. She would fracture under the pressure, and he would see the truth. That maternal love was just another transaction that broke when the cost became too high. I have $800, Imani said, her voice hollow. In my savings account. You can have all of it. Han Jun said nothing. Waited. I'll work for free, she continued, the words coming faster now, desperate. However long it takes. I'll come in on my days off. I'll take extra shifts. I'll do anything. Please, just tell me what you need. She didn't look at Louis. Didn't blame him. Didn't even flinch. That's not enough, Han Jun said flatly. Then I'll find another job. 2 jobs. I'll sell everything I own. My grandmother's ring, her voice cracked. Please, just tell me how to make this right. Han Jun's eyes narrowed. You're willing to work for free for years? To give up everything? Yes. No hesitation. For a scratch your son made? He didn't mean to, Imani said, and there was something fierce in her voice now, protective and unyielding. He's 7. He doesn't understand the value of things like this. But he's a good boy. This is my responsibility. Han Jun turned his gaze to Louis, who stood frozen, tears streaming silently down his cheeks, the weight of his mother's sacrifice crushing him even though he didn't fully understand it. And what does the boy say? Han Jun asked, his voice soft, dangerous. Does he have anything to offer? The question hung in the air like a blade. Before we move on, a small favor. Subscribe if you're enjoying the journey so far. Louis wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, smearing tears across his cheeks. His small body was trembling, but he stepped forward, moving out from behind his mother's protective stance. Imani reached for him instinctively, but Louis gently pushed her hand away. It was my fault, he said, his voice barely above a whisper but steady. I touched your case. I touched you. Mama told me not to move, but I didn't listen. He hadn't touched the case. Han Jun knew this with absolute certainty. But the boy was taking responsibility anyway, trying to shield his mother from consequences he didn't fully understand. I don't have money, Louis continued, his small hands fumbling in the pocket of his worn pants. But I have something else. Han Jun watched, his expression carefully neutral, as the boy's fingers closed around something small. Louis pulled his hand out slowly, reverently, as if he were handling something fragile and infinitely precious. It was a military dog tag. The metal was tarnished, the chain broken and retied with string at some point. The engraving was worn but still visible. A name, a service number, a blood type. Louis held it in his palm, staring down at it for a long moment, his small chest rising and falling with shaky breaths. This was my daddy's, Louis said quietly. He was in the army. He died when I was 3, so I don't remember him much. But Mama says he was brave. She says he always did the right thing, even when it was hard. The boy's fingers closed around the tag, squeezing it tight, then slowly relaxed. She gave this to me on my 6th birthday. Said it was the only thing we had left of him after everything got sold to pay for his funeral. Louis's voice cracked. She said as long as I had this, a piece of daddy was always with me. Han Jun's chest constricted. The sensation was foreign, uncomfortable, like something vital was being crushed inside his ribcage. It's real silver, Louis continued, holding the tag out toward Han Jun with both hands, the gesture formal and heartbreaking. Mama checked once. She said it's worth maybe $50, but it might be more if it's from the military. And if it's not enough, I can work too. I can clean things. I'm small, so I can reach places other people can't. I can help Mama pay. The dog tag sat in the boy's small palms, catching the light. A father's last gift. A dead man's identity. The only physical connection a child had to the parent he'd lost. And Louis was offering it to a stranger to save his mother from debt. Please take it, Louis said, and now the tears were flowing freely again. I don't want Mama to work for free for years. She's already so tired. She cries sometimes when she thinks I'm asleep because her back hurts from cleaning all day. He stepped closer, holding the dog tag higher, his small arms stretched up toward Han Jun like an offering at an altar. It's all I have, but it should be enough. Daddy would understand. He'd want me to protect Mama. That's what brave people do, right? They give up what matters to protect people they love. Han Jun took the dog tag. The metal was warm from the boy's hands. Light. Worthless in monetary terms. worth less than a single bill from the briefcase sitting untouched on his desk. And yet, in this moment, Han Jun understood with devastating clarity that this 7-year-old boy had just paid a price he himself had never been capable of paying. Louis had surrendered his soul for someone else's salvation. No calculation. No hesitation. Just pure, absolute love manifested as sacrifice. The test was over. Han Jun had his answer. And it was destroying him. Still with me? Then hit subscribe. It means more than you know. For a long moment, Han Jun stood motionless, the dog tag resting in his palm like a hot coal. Louis had stepped back beside his mother, his small frame shaking with silent sobs. Imani had wrapped her arms around him, her own tears falling into his hair, both of them waiting for judgment from the man who held everything they had left. When Han Jun finally spoke, his voice was different. The cold control had fractured, leaving something raw and human underneath. There was no damage. The words came out quiet, almost hoarse. Imani's head snapped up. What? The scratch on the case. Han Jun's hand tightened around the dog tag. It's been there for months. Your son never touched it. He never went near it. The silence that followed was deafening. I don't understand, Imani whispered, her arms tightening protectively around Louis. Han Jun turned toward his desk, toward the briefcase still sitting open, money visible and untouched. He gestured to it with his free hand, the movement almost violent in its abruptness. $20,000. I left it there deliberately. Open. Accessible. His voice was getting rougher, like each word was being dragged over broken glass. I pretended to sleep. I've done this test dozens of times over the years with different people. Staff. Associates. Family members. Everyone takes the money. Every single person. He turned back to face them, and for the first time, Imani saw something other than cold authority in his expression. She saw pain. Old, deep, festering pain. I believed that every human being was fundamentally selfish. That given opportunity and no consequences, people would always reveal their greed. I built my entire life on that belief. My business. My relationships. Everything. His jaw clenched. Your son walked right past $20,000. He didn't even look at it. He came to check if I was sick. Louis's crying had quieted. He was staring at Han Jun with wide, confused eyes. He touched me with concern. Like I was a person worth caring about. Han Jun's voice cracked. No one has done that in 20 years. No one. He looked down at the dog tag in his hand, then back at the boy. And then, when I fabricated a debt to test you both further, to see if pressure would break you, to see if you would turn on each other. He stopped, struggling. This child offered me the only thing he had left of his father. Without hesitation. To protect his mother from a debt he didn't create for damage he didn't cause. Han Jun's hand was shaking now. He held up the dog tag so they could see it clearly. Do you understand what this is worth? $50 in metal. But in sacrifice? In love. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. This is worth more than my entire empire. More than every dollar I've earned, every property I own, every person who fears my name. He walked toward them slowly, then did something Imani never expected. Han Jun lowered himself to one knee, bringing himself to Louis's eye level. His imposing presence suddenly diminished, made vulnerable. I am a king of ghosts, he said, looking directly into Louis's tear-stained face. I rule over money and violence and fear. I have everything the world says matters, and I am empty. You, child, have nothing but this tarnished piece of metal. And yet you possess the only wealth that means anything. He held out the dog tag, offering it back. I cannot accept this payment. This debt was never real. But your willingness to pay it, his voice broke completely. That was more real than anything in my life has ever been. Louis reached out slowly, taking back the dog tag with trembling fingers. He clutched it to his chest, fresh tears streaming down his face. Han Jun remained kneeling, his head bowed, looking more defeated in that moment than any enemy had ever made him look. Forgive me, he whispered. If your heart is following this story, let it guide your finger to the subscribe button. Louis, still clutching the dog tag to his chest, looked at his mother uncertainly. Imani's mind was reeling, trying to process the sudden shift from terror to this strange, vulnerable confession. She kept waiting for the trap, for the punishment that made sense. But Han Jun remained on his knee, his head bowed, waiting. Finally, Louis spoke, his voice small but clear. You were testing us? Yes. That was mean. Han Jun's lips twitched, something that might have been the ghost of a smile or the beginning of tears. Yes, it was. But you gave it back. Louis looked down at the dog tag in his hands. You could have kept it. No, Han Jun said firmly, raising his head. I couldn't. Some things are not mine to take. He stood slowly, his joints protesting from the unfamiliar position of kneeling. When he moved back to his desk, both Imani and Lewis tensed, old fear reasserting itself. But Han Jun simply closed the briefcase, lifted it, and walked back to them. He held it out to Imani. "This is yours. Not as payment for the fabricated damage. Not as compensation for my deception." His voice was steady now, purposeful. "This is a reward for raising a son who possesses more integrity than any man I've ever known. Use it to get out of the slums. Use it to give him the life he deserves." Imani stared at the briefcase like it might explode. "Sir, I can't." "You can. You will." There was no room for argument in his tone, but it wasn't threatening. It was almost protective. $20,000. It will not solve every problem, but it will give you time. Breathing room. A chance. Slowly, shakily, Imani took the briefcase. The weight of it felt impossible. Han Jun turned back to Lewis, studying the boy with an intensity that would have been frightening if not for the softness that had crept into his expression. "I would like to make a deal with you, Lewis Davis." The boy blinked up at him, confused and still wary. "Your mother's gift provides immediate security. But I would like to offer something more. A full scholarship to any school you choose. Private tutors if needed. And when you are old enough, if you wish it, a position in my legitimate businesses. Not the violence, not the criminal enterprise, but the legal holdings. Hotels. Import companies. Real estate." Imani's breath caught. "Why would you?" "Because I need him," Han Jun interrupted, and the raw honesty in his voice silenced her. "I have spent my life surrounded by people who want something from me. People who smile and scheme. Who obey out of fear and betray when opportunity arises. I have no family that matters. No children. No heir I would trust." He looked back at Lewis. "But you, who offered everything for your mother without knowing if it would be enough, you I would trust. You I would teach. Not to be like me, but to be better than me. To build something clean on the foundation of my mistakes." "Like an uncle?" Lewis asked quietly. Something shifted in Han Jun's chest at the word. "Yes, like an uncle. I would not ask you to abandon your mother or forget your father. But I would ask permission to help guide your path. To be part of your life." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the dog tag Lewis had offered minutes before. Somewhere in the chaos, Han Jun had kept it. "And in exchange, I would ask one thing. Let me keep this. Not as payment. As a reminder." He held the tarnished metal up to the light. "A reminder that there is still goodness in this world. That I was wrong. That redemption is possible through someone else's grace." Lewis looked at his mother. Imani, tears streaming freely now, nodded slowly. The boy stepped forward and extended his small hand, formal and serious. "Okay, deal." Han Jun took the child's hand in his own scarred, tattooed one. The contrast was stark. Innocence and corruption, hope and regret, future and past. They shook. And in that moment, the cynical boss who believed in nothing found himself anchored by the one thing he'd thought impossible. Pure, unconditional human goodness. The handshake lasted only seconds, but it rewrote both their destinies. Stories like this take time to craft. If you want more, subscribe. I'd love to keep making them for you. 10 years later, Han Jun died in his sleep. Peacefully, they said. No violence. No betrayal. No dramatic final stand against enemies. Just an old warrior's heart finally giving out in the quiet darkness of a Tuesday morning. The funeral was lavish and crowded. Men in expensive suits with cold eyes. Women dripping in jewelry that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Distant cousins who hadn't spoken to Han Jun in decades. Former associates who'd once plotted his downfall. They came not to mourn, but to position themselves for what came next. Among them sat a 17-year-old boy in a perfectly tailored black suit, his posture straight, his expression composed. Lewis Davis had grown tall and lean, with the quiet confidence of someone who'd been educated in the best schools money could buy and raised by two parents who loved him in fundamentally different but equally profound ways. His eyes held intelligence and something rarer. Genuine kindness that hadn't been beaten out of him by the world's cruelty. Beside him sat his mother, Imani, now the director of the Davis Foundation for Single Mothers, an organization that had lifted hundreds of families out of poverty over the past decade. She wore simple elegance, her success measured not in diamonds, but in the thank you letters that filled her office and the children who had beds and food because of her work. On Lewis's other side sat Han Jun's attorney, an ancient man named Park who'd served the family for 40 years and looked like he might follow his client into death any day now. The reading of the will took place in Han Jun's study, the same room where a 7-year-old boy in yellow gloves had once changed the trajectory of 2 lives. The leather chair was empty now. The shelves were dustier. But the display case with the katana remained, and next to it, in a small velvet-lined frame, hung a tarnished military dog tag. The vultures circled. Han Jun's half-brother, Sung Min, sat at the front, his expression one of barely concealed triumph. He'd been waiting for this day for years, calculating how he'd restructure the empire, which associates he'd eliminate, how he'd finally step out of his brother's shadow. Behind him, various nephews, nieces, and second cousins whispered among themselves about percentages and properties. In the back row, 3 of Han Jun's former business partners exchanged knowing glances. They'd each invested in his ventures, each expecting returns that would now come from inheritance. Attorney Park cleared his throat and began reading. The document was long, full of legal language that basically said the same thing in different ways. Nothing. The half-brother received nothing. The cousins received nothing. The former partners received nothing. Various items went to museums. Some properties were sold with proceeds designated for charity. Minor staff received small bequests for their years of service. But the empire itself, the legitimate businesses, the real estate holdings, the investment portfolios, the legal assets accumulated over 40 years, went unmentioned as Park turned page after page. Sungmin's confident expression had curdled into confusion, then anger. Whispers turned to murmurs, murmurs to protests. "There must be a mistake," Sungmin interrupted, standing abruptly. "Where are the primary holdings? The hotels? The import companies? Who inherits the business?" Attorney Park looked up slowly, his ancient eyes sharp despite their roomy appearance. He seemed almost pleased by the question. "We're coming to that now," he said, and turned to the final page. Every eye in the room focused on the old man's lips as he began to read the last section of Han Jun's will. Every eye except Lewis's. The boy was staring at the framed dog tag on the wall, remembering a day when he'd offered everything he had to save his mother, never imagining where that moment would lead. Park's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "I leave the whole of my legitimate business empire, all properties, holdings, and assets, to Lewis Davis, adopted nephew and sole heir." The room exploded. One more chapter to go. Before we finish, subscribe so you're here when the next story drops. Voices erupted in furious protest. Sungmin slammed his hands on the table, his face purple with rage. "This is fraud. That boy has no blood relation. He has no right." "He has every right," Attorney Park interrupted, his voice cutting through the chaos with surprising force for such an old man. "This will was written 5 years ago, updated annually, and reviewed by 3 independent legal firms. It is ironclad. He's nobody," a cousin shouted from the back. "A child. What does he know about running an empire?" "More than any of you," Park replied coldly. Lewis sat perfectly still through the uproar, his hands folded in his lap. Imani had placed a protective hand on his shoulder, but he didn't seem afraid. He seemed sad. Not for himself, but for them. These people who'd surrounded Han Jun's life with greed, and were now revealing exactly why they'd been excluded from his death. Park held up a sealed envelope, and gradually, the room quieted. The promise of more information was too tempting to ignore. Han Jun left a letter to be read after the will's disclosure. "I will read it now in its entirety." He broke the seal and unfolded the paper. Han Jun's handwriting was sharp and precise, even in his final years. "To those gathered here seeking what you believe you are owed nothing. You came to me with hands extended, never with hearts open. You smiled at my success and resented my power. You waited for my death like vultures circling a dying animal. You offered loyalty only when it profited you, and you would have betrayed me the moment it served your interests." Sungmin's face had gone from purple to pale. Park continued. 10 years ago, a 7-year-old boy entered my study. I tested him with money he desperately needed. He ignored it. I fabricated a debt his family could not pay. He offered me the only thing he had, a tarnished dog tag, his father's last gift, the only physical memory of a man he barely remembered. He offered it without hesitation to protect his mother. The room was silent now, every person hanging on the words of a dead man's judgment. That child taught me that I had spent my entire life accumulating wealth while remaining bankrupt in the things that mattered. He paid a debt I didn't know I owed. The debt of a soul too hardened to recognize grace when it stood before him. Lewis Davis bought my redemption with his sacrifice, and I have spent the last 10 years trying to become worthy of that gift. Park's voice wavered slightly, the first sign of emotion. You ask why he inherits everything? Because he is the only one who never asked for anything. Because loyalty is not bought with blood or money, but earned through selfless kindness. Because he is the only person I ever met who possessed true wealth. The wealth of character, of compassion, of honor. The attorney set down the letter and reached beneath the table. He produced a small velvet box, midnight blue, and handed it to Louis. The boy opened it with trembling fingers. Inside, nestled in silk, was his father's dog tag. But it had been transformed. The tarnished metal was now polished to a mirror shine, every letter of the engraving restored and deepened. It was encased in a frame of gold filigree, delicate and beautiful, turning a simple piece of military identification into something sacred. A chain of white gold accompanied it, new and strong. Beneath the dog tag was a small card in Han Jun's handwriting. You gave this to save your mother. I kept it to save myself. Now it returns to you, as proof that some debts can never be repaid, only honored. Louis lifted the dog tag from the box, and tears streamed down his face. Not tears of grief, but of understanding. He finally comprehended what Han Jun had been trying to tell him all these years. That kindness was not weakness. That sacrifice was the highest form of strength. That a good heart was worth more than any empire. Imani pulled her son close, both of them crying now, while around them the room slowly emptied. The vultures left one by one, their hopes of inheritance turning to ash, their protests dying in their throats because they knew, every one of them knew, that Han Jun had been right about them. When the study was finally empty except for Louis, Imani, and the old attorney, Park spoke one last time. He was a hard man, your uncle, but you made him human again. The old man's eyes were wet. That was the greatest gift anyone ever gave him. Use his empire well, Louis. Build something beautiful on the foundation he left you. Louis nodded, clutching the dog tag to his chest the way he had as a 7-year-old boy in yellow gloves. Some fortunes are inherited, but the greatest legacies are earned through the simple, radical act of choosing kindness when the world expects cruelty. Han Jun had learned that lesson too late. Louis Davis would live it for both of them. If this story stayed with you, let's stay connected. Hit subscribe.